Look at this photograph. The year is 1888, a building weighing 2,000 tons, granite, marble, steel beams, and it is being pulled by horses, 30 horses. Do you know how many horses it would take to move such a mass according to the laws of physics? 2,500. Modern engineers look at these archival images and cannot explain how this is possible. NASA uses powerful heavy-duty transporters to move shuttles weighing 70 tons, yet here we have a building 30 times heavier moved by a few dozen horses. Either our physics textbooks are written incorrectly, or there was a technology in the 19th century that we aren't being told about. And this is only the beginning. Let's start with the facts that cannot be disputed. 1888, Chicago. The Pelican Hotel, a 5-story brick building covering 1,200 square meters. The owner decides to move the structure to a new location. The distance? Nearly 200 meters. There are guests inside the building during the move. Yes, you heard that right. The hotel continues to operate right during the transport. The official version states that wooden rollers, jacks, ropes, and 600 people with horses were used. Sounds reasonable, doesn't it? But let's do the math. The average weight of a brick is 3.5 kilograms. A 5-story building of this size consists of roughly 500,000 bricks. The brickwork alone accounts for 1,750 tons. Add a stone foundation, another 400 to 600 tons. Wooden floors, stairs, furniture, plumbing systems, at least 200 tons more. We get a total mass of around 2,000 to 2,500 tons. Now, let's look at the physics. One horse in a team can generate a pulling force of about 750 kilograms on a flat surface. This is under ideal conditions. No inclines, solid ground, and a minimum coefficient of friction. The static friction coefficient for wood on wood, those wooden rollers, is 0.25 to 0.4. Let's take the minimum value. With a mass of 2,000 tons, the static friction force would be 500 tons, or 500,000 kilograms. Divide that by the pulling force of one horse. 500,000 divided by 750 equals 666 horses, and that is just to get the building moving. To pull it 200 meters while controlling the movement and keeping the structure intact, you would need at least 3 times that amount. 2,000 horses. Yet in archival photographs, we see a maximum of 30 to 40 animals. Furthermore, reports from that time mention that the move took only 4 hours. 4 hours. The speed of moving such a mass on wooden rollers physically cannot exceed 5 to 7 meters per hour at this weight. Wood begins to crumble, crack, and sink into the ground. Moving 200 meters should have taken at least 30 to 40 hours of continuous work. But no, 4 hours. And this isn't an isolated case. 1930, Moscow. The Mossovet building on Tverskaya Street, an 18th century architectural monument weighing about 23,000 tons. They decide to move it 13.5 meters back to widen the street. For this, the best engineers of the USSR are mobilized, using hydraulic jacks, special rail tracks, and electric winches. The work takes several months. Now, pay attention. This building is 10 times heavier. But 1930s technology with electricity, hydraulics, and metal structures barely manages a task that was supposedly accomplished in the late 1800s using wood and horses. How can this be explained? There are documents, there are photographs, there are calculations, and none of them fit into a logical picture. Do you know what's strangest? The deeper I dug into this topic, the more similar cases I found all over the world, and every time the story repeats. Massive buildings, minimal equipment, impossible speeds. There are details in these cases, in San Francisco, New York, London, that completely destroy the official version of events. But let's return to our question. If horses couldn't do it, then who did it? Or what? To answer, we need to understand who built these buildings, and this is where a truly dark story begins. Because all these buildings in Chicago, New York, San Francisco, Moscow, St. Petersburg share one common trait:
a trait that official history is desperately trying to erase. That trait is an architectural style that does not belong to any civilization known to us. Open any 19th century architecture textbook. They will tell you about neoclassicism, eclecticism, and Art Nouveau. They will show you how European and American architects invented new styles by drawing inspiration from antiquity. Now look at the photographs. St. Petersburg, Russia. The Winter Palace, Kazan Cathedral, grandiose structures with colonnades, domes, and incredible detailing. Chicago, USA. The World's Columbian Exposition of 1893, the White City, made of hundreds of pavilions, each looking like an ancient temple. San Francisco, USA. City Hall, a dome larger than the U.S. Capitol in Washington. Calcutta, India. Victoria Memorial, a marble miracle in the middle of the tropics. All these buildings were built at roughly the same time, the second half of the 19th century. All are executed in nearly identical style. All require incredible engineering precision and resources. And all of them, according to official history, were built by different countries, different architects, and in different climate zones. Yet they look as if they were designed by a single civilization. This civilization is called Tartaria. Today, this word causes academic historians to smirk. Conspiracy theory, they say, pseudo-scientific nonsense.
But here is a fact they cannot explain. On maps from the 18th and 19th centuries, an enormous empire named Tartaria or Tartaria is shown in the territory from the Urals to the Pacific Ocean. The 1771 Encyclopedia Britannica describes Tartaria as the largest country in the world. And then, suddenly, in the early 20th century, this name disappears from all sources, completely. What happened? Where did an empire the size of a continent go? The official version is that it was simply a European name for various Asian territories and had no political meaning. Tartaria was not a country, but a geographical term. But then why does it have clear borders on maps? Why are capitals indicated? Why are there descriptions of its cities, population, and trade routes? And most importantly, why is the architecture of Tartarian buildings so different from everything built before and after? Let's look at the key features of these structures. 1. Domes and star forts. Almost all large Tartarian buildings have characteristic domes, not just decorative but functional. They often contain complex resonance chambers. Star forts, fortresses with geometrically perfect radiating walls, are found all over the world, from St. Petersburg to Indonesia. Same design, same proportions. 2. Incredible detailing. Look at the facades. Every square meter is covered in ornaments, bas-reliefs, and sculptures. To create this by hand would take decades of work by thousands of masters, yet these buildings were erected in 2 to 3 years. 3. A unified system of measurement. Researchers have found that the proportions of Tartarian buildings follow a single modular principle, not metric, not imperial, but something else. Golden ratio proportions are found everywhere. 4. Technological anomalies. In many buildings, walled-up channels of unknown purpose, chambers in foundations, and ventilation and drainage systems have been found that exceed the capabilities of that time. But the strangest thing is not the buildings themselves. The strangest thing is that there are almost no documents regarding the construction of many of them. The Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, officially built between 1754 and 1762 by architect Rastrelli, but detailed blueprints have not survived. There are no detailed reports on how the foundation was laid, how the columns were raised, or how the domes were mounted. The White City of the Columbian Exposition in Chicago, built in 2 years, 1891 to 1893, over 200 buildings, a total area of 2.8 square kilometers. Most of the structures were then demolished immediately after the fair. The official reason, they were temporary, made of plaster and wood. But photographs show massive stone constructions, and witnesses describe how after the exposition, the buildings weren't demolished, but burned. An entire city was set on fire and turned to ash in a few days.
Why burn temporary plaster structures? Unless they weren't temporary. And here we return to our moved buildings, because if these structures were not built when we are told and not by those mentioned in textbooks, then perhaps they weren't moved by conventional methods either. Let's talk about numbers. Cold, impartial calculations that don't lie. 1909, Indianapolis. School building number 80, a 3-story brick structure weighing 1,100 tons. It needs to be moved 30 meters. Engineer Kurt Schmidt develops a special system of 72 hydraulic jacks and steel rails. The work takes 5 months. In his report, Schmidt wrote, "Every inch of movement required careful monitoring. The slightest misalignment could destroy the structure. We moved at a speed of 15 to 20 centimeters per hour. 1,100 tons, 30 meters, 5 months. The best technology of the early 20th century." Now let's go back to 1888. The building in Chicago weighs twice as much. The distance is 7 times further. The technology is 10 times more primitive. Yet it required hundreds of times less time. How? There are only 3 possible explanations. Explanation 1. The laws of physics worked differently in the 19th century. Sounds absurd, right? But look at the facts. In 1888, the force of gravity was the same. The coefficient of friction was the same. The strength of materials was the same. Yet the results were completely different. Either something in our calculations is wrong, or the calculations of that time used factors we don't know about. Explanation 2, the reports are lying. Perhaps the move took 4 months, not 4 hours. Perhaps 300 horses were used, not 30. Perhaps the building wasn't monolithic, but was taken apart. But then why lie? And why is the lie so systematic? Similar discrepancies are found in reports from dozens of cities in different countries on different continents. If this is a deception, it is global, coordinated. For what purpose? Explanation 3, the technology was completely different. And this is where it gets really interesting. Because there are documents, little known, often ignored by academic science, that describe methods for moving massive objects that have nothing to do with mechanical pulling. Acoustic levitation. In the 1930s, German researchers conducted experiments on the effect of sound waves on massive objects. They discovered that at a certain frequency and amplitude of sound, the effective weight of an object can be significantly reduced. The principle is simple. Sound waves create zones of high and low pressure. If an object is in a node of a standing wave, the pressure from below is greater than from above. The object floats on the sound, like a cork in water. Modern laboratories can levitate small objects, water droplets, foam balls. But what if in the past, this technology was developed to the point that it allowed work with tons of stone? It sounds like science fiction. But let's look at circumstantial evidence. Tibetan monks have told legends for centuries about how ancient builders used the sound of drums and trumpets to lift stones up mountains. Dr. Jarl, a Swedish physician who visited Tibet in 1939, described how monks used 19 musical instruments arranged at specific angles to lift 1-ton stone blocks to a height of 250 meters. His report was mocked by the scientific community, but the photographs remained. The Egyptian pyramids, blocks weighing up to 80 tons, no traces of mechanical lifting devices. But on temple walls, there are images of priests with sistrums, instruments that produce a resonating sound. Baalbek, Lebanon, stones weighing 800 to 1,000 tons, laid with millimeter precision. Modern cranes cannot lift such weight. And here's what's interesting. Almost all Tartarian buildings have domes. Domes are perfect resonators. They amplify sound, create standing waves, and focus acoustic energy. What if domes are not decorations? What if they are technology? Imagine you place a building in a field of resonating frequencies. Its effective weight drops dozens of times. Now 30 horses really can move 2,000 tons because they aren't pulling 2,000 tons, they're pulling 100. But there's a problem with this theory. For it to work, you need energy sources, powerful sound generators, frequency control systems. Where are they? They didn't exist in the 19th century. Or Did they? Because the deeper we dig, the more evidence we find that technologies existed in the 19th century that do not fit into the standard picture of history. And the main question is, why did they disappear? Nikola Tesla demonstrates wireless energy transmission to the public. His Wardenclyffe Tower is designed to transmit electricity through the atmosphere without wires over any distance. The project is shut down. Funding stops. The tower is demolished. The official version, the technology didn't work. Tesla was wrong. But here's the strangeness. Tesla's personal diaries disappear after his death in 1943. The FBI confiscates all documents. Most have not been declassified to this day. What was in them?
Tesla wrote about resonance. He wrote that every object has its own vibration frequency. If you act on an object at this frequency, you can make it vibrate, shatter, or levitate. He conducted experiments with mechanical oscillators. Once, a small device attached to a steel beam in his laboratory nearly destroyed an entire building. Tesla claimed a small resonator is enough to split the Earth in half. A metaphor? Or a literal description of the technology's capabilities? Let's consider a hypothesis. At the end of the 19th century, there was a developed network of energy stations capable of generating and transmitting powerful resonance frequencies. These stations are the Tartarian buildings with domes. They aren't decorations, they are infrastructure. The evidence? Anomaly number 1, the ubiquitous presence of bell towers. Almost every large building of that time has a tower or dome with bells, but the bells in them are strange. They aren't church bells. Often they're metal structures of complex shapes placed in resonance chambers. What if these aren't bells, but resonators, devices for generating or receiving sound or electromagnetic waves? Anomaly number 2, building foundations. In many Tartarian structures, underground rooms filled with sand, stones, or water have been found. The official explanation? Drainage systems. But why are they such complex shapes? Why do they often contain metal elements laid out in a specific order? Philip Callahan in the 1960s studied medieval European towers. He found that many of them possess the properties of dielectric antennas, capable of receiving and emitting electromagnetic waves in a very narrow frequency range. Callahan suggested the towers were used for weather control or communication. His work was ignored. But imagine a network of such towers across the world, a single system, energy transmitted wirelessly, resonance used for various purposes, from lighting to changing the mass of objects. Moving buildings becomes a trivial task. You activate the resonators, reduce the weight of the structure, move it with a few animals, deactivate it, done. But if this technology existed, where did it go? Hypothesis 1, a catastrophe. Something went wrong. The system spun out of control. Perhaps it was related to solar activity. A powerful flare could have overloaded the entire network. The result? Global fires, destruction, the collapse of civilization. Hypothesis 2, intentional destruction. The new powers, those who came after Tartaria, deliberately dismantled the system. They rewrote history. They hid the technologies. Why? Control. Free energy means independence. An independent population is a threat to those who want power.
But there is a third hypothesis, the most provocative one. The buildings were never moved. Think about it. What if the photographs of moving are actually photographs of excavations? What if these buildings were already standing in their places, but were buried under earth, mud, and the aftermath of a cataclysm? And moving is actually digging out, cleaning, and restoring. Look closely at archival images. In many photos of moved buildings, you can see buried first floors. Basement windows are at ground level. Entrance doors are on the second floor with ladders placed against them. The official explanation, low foundations, poor planning. But why is this phenomenon everywhere? Why in St. Petersburg, New York, and Chicago, everywhere are the first floors of old buildings buried? What if there was a global flood, or a series of mud flows, an event that buried an entire civilization under meters of soil?
And moving buildings is just a legend covering up the excavations. A legend invented to explain why old buildings suddenly appear in new places, because they were simply dug up right where they had always been. But if this is true, if there was a catastrophe that buried an entire civilization, when did it happen? And are there traces of this event in historical records? Number 1. The Moscow Fire. The city burns for 3 days. 3/4 of Moscow turns to ash. Tens of thousands die. The official version, the fire is connected to the War of 1812 and Napoleon's retreat. The Russians set the city themselves to keep it from the enemy. A noble, patriotic story. But there are nuances. The first fires break out a day before French troops enter. The fire spreads with incredible speed, faster than a typical arson. Witnesses describe pillars of flame shooting from underground and fire that cannot be extinguished with water. Now let's look at the timeline. 1811, the Moscow Fire. 1812, the London Fire destroying a significant part of the port areas. 1814, the fire in Washington, burning the White House and the Capitol. 1835, the Great Fire of New York, 700 buildings in the city center destroyed. 1842, the Hamburg Fire, a third of the city in ruins. 1871, the Great Chicago Fire, the city burns completely. 1871, on the same day, the Peshtigo Fire in Wisconsin, the deadliest fire in U.S. history. 2,500 people die. The fire spreads with the speed of a hurricane. 1872, the Boston Fire. 1873, fires in San Francisco. Notice the pattern. The world's largest cities burn with systematic regularity throughout 60 years of the 19th century. A coincidence? Official explanations vary. Someone knocked over a lamp, a cow tipped a lantern, or military actions. But there are common features in all these descriptions. The fire spreads abnormally fast, faster than physically possible for burning wood and common materials. Water doesn't help. Witnesses repeatedly describe firefighters as powerless. The fire refuses to be extinguished. Strange atmospheric phenomena. During many fires, unusual clouds, electrical discharges, and changes in the sky color are observed. Selective destruction. Some buildings burn to the ground while neighboring ones remain untouched. Often, wooden structures survive while stone ones are destroyed. Engineer John Damrell, who studied the consequences of the 1872 Boston Fire, wrote, "Granite blocks melted, iron beams twisted like paper. I have never seen an ordinary fire cause such destruction." The melting point of granite is about 1,200 to 1,250 degrees Celsius. A typical fire produces temperatures of 600 to 800 degrees Celsius. What could create such heat? Some researchers suggest these weren't ordinary fires. This was the effect of directed energy, perhaps a consequence of that global energy system we discussed. Imagine a network of resonators worldwide. Something disrupts the balance, a solar storm, an earthquake, a human error. The resonators begin generating chaotic waves. Energy accumulates, discharges. Fires, simultaneous, global. But there is another strangeness. Immediately after these fires, a massive reconstruction begins. Cities are rebuilt, and they are built surprisingly fast. Chicago, after the 1871 fire, is rebuilt in 20 years and becomes a major industrial center. Hundreds of buildings, infrastructure, parks. San Francisco, after the 1906 earthquake and fire, recovers in 10 years. Where did the resources come from? Where was the labor? Where was the technology for such building speed? Moreover, in all these restored cities, buildings are found that supposedly survived the fires. But when you look at them, they look different from the surrounding structures, more perfect, more detailed, as if they didn't just survive the fire, as if they survived because they were built earlier, much earlier, and they were simply cleared of the traces of catastrophe and attributed to the current era. The World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893, just 22 years after the total destruction of the city. How does a city burned to the ground not only recover in 2 decades, but also build temporary pavilions the size of an entire district? Unless the pavilions weren't temporary, unless they were already standing.
And the exhibition was just a way to explain their existence, to show the world, look, we just built this in 2 years, now we'll take it apart. And then burn it, so no questions remain. I understand how crazy this sounds. I didn't believe it myself until I started comparing dates, studying photos, and reading accounts. But the more you look, the more details don't add up. Each new lead reveals the next layer of deception. If you feel like something is wrong here, I ask you one thing. Leave your thoughts on where you are, your city, your country, because a map is being assembled. A map of Tartarian buildings across the world. This data helps find patterns that official history tries to hide. Let's solve this riddle together. But fine, let's assume this is just a series of coincidences. Then explain this to me. Where did the blueprints go? Try to find the original construction blueprints for the Winter Palace. You won't be able to. Yes, there are reconstructions, drawings made later, archival sketches, but the original detailed plans used to erect this monstrously complex building are not there. Lost, archivists say. Fine, let's assume Russia had fires, revolutions, and wars. Documents could vanish. But the U.S. Capitol in Washington, the original blueprints are fragmentary. Most were lost in the fire of 1851. The Eiffel Tower in Paris, built in 1889, relatively recent, an engineering marvel, but try to find Eiffel's full resonance load calculations, which he would have had to perform for such a structure. They aren't there. There are basic schemes, general drawings, but the detailed engineering calculations necessary for building a 300-meter metal structure do not exist, as if they never were. Or as if Eiffel didn't design the tower, he recreated it based on something that already existed in other places at other times. Look at the pattern of disappearing documents. 1. Architectural blueprints from major 19th century buildings are lost. 2. Engineering journals regarding the movement of buildings are practically non-existent. There are newspaper clippings and short reports, but no detailed technology descriptions or step-by-step instructions. You might say it was common practice, so why describe it? But then why in the 20th century is every building move documented down to the smallest detail? 3. Personal diaries of key figures disappear under mysterious circumstances. Nikola Tesla. His papers were confiscated immediately after his death. John Keeley, an inventor working on resonance engines in the late 19th century. After his death, all his devices were destroyed and his records vanished. Victor Schauberger, an Austrian inventor who claimed gravity could be manipulated. His prototypes were confiscated after World War II. Attempts to replicate these feats fail. In the 1930s in the USSR, engineers tried to recreate the methods of old masters for moving buildings. The project was classified. Results were never published. In the 1950s in the USA, Edward Leeds-Kalnin built Coral Castle in Florida, a complex of megaliths weighing up to 30 tons each. He worked alone, at night, letting no one near. When asked how he did it, he said, "I know the secrets of the pyramid builders." After his death, a government commission studied his records. Their conclusion? The methods used by Leeds-Kalnin do not correspond to known science. The records were classified. Why? If the technologies didn't exist, why classify them? If they didn't work, why hide them? Unless they did work, and someone didn't want the world to know. Here is a fact that cannot be denied. Modern engineers cannot repeat some achievements of the past. A group of researchers tries to move a 2-ton stone block using methods supposedly used in ancient Egypt. Hundreds of people, wooden rollers, ropes. Failure. The block gets stuck, the rollers break, the ropes snap, the project stops. Yet the ancient Egyptians moved blocks 40 times heavier and laid them with millimeter precision.
An engineering company tries to recreate 19th century building moving technology for a documentary. They use modern hydraulic systems and computer modeling. The project cost is $2 million. It takes 8 months. The result is the movement of a small wooden structure for 50 meters. In the 19th century, they did more, faster, and cheaper. Either we have forgotten something, or we were never told something. And now the final question, the one for which we traveled through this entire rabbit hole. If the technologies existed, where did they go? And most importantly, who benefits from hiding them? Imagine a world where energy is free. Not just cheap, not subsidized, absolutely free. Because it can be taken directly from the atmosphere, from the Earth's resonance, from standing waves. No power plants needed, no oil needed, no wires needed. Every home is autonomous. Every device works forever. How would the world change? There would be no oil companies, no electric bills, no control over resources, and there would be no power, because power is always control over resources. Whoever controls energy controls the economy. Whoever controls the economy controls the people.
Now ask yourself, if you had the chance to destroy a technology that strips you of that control, would you do it? Of course you would. And if you look at the history of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, we see exactly that, a systematic destruction of alternative technologies. Nikola Tesla tries to create a wireless energy system. The project is shut down. J.P. Morgan, his sponsor, realizes if energy is free, you can't put a meter on it. He pulls the funding. The tower is demolished. Victor Schauberger develops vortex engines running on water. After the war, he is taken to the U.S. and forced to hand over all developments. He dies under mysterious circumstances a few months later. Before his death, he said, "They took everything. They destroyed my work." Stanley Meyer invents a hydrogen fuel cell, a device supposedly allowing a car to run on water. A patent is issued. Demonstrations are held. 1998, Meyer suddenly dies, officially an aneurysm. His last words, according to his brother, "They poisoned me." The pattern is obvious. Any technology threatening the existing energy system disappears, along with its creators. But back to the buildings. If Tartarian structures were part of a global energy network, then their destruction was no accident. It was an operation. The fires of the late 19th century were a cleanup. The World's Fairs were a cover-up. Temporary pavilions that are then burned are a way to explain the disappearance of what couldn't be left behind. And the moving of buildings? Maybe it wasn't moving at all. Maybe it was deactivation. Buildings with resonator domes were found disconnected from the system, moved meaning their internal structure was physically destroyed so they would stop functioning and set in a new place, now as ordinary buildings, without technology, without function. Turning a living system into a stage set, and the photographs of moving are documentation of the process, proof that we can do this using ordinary methods, a legend for future generations. But if this is true, if there was an entire civilization that possessed technologies we are only beginning to understand, where did the people go? Tartaria, according to maps, occupied a third of the continent, millions of residents, a developed culture. Where did they go? Official history is silent because there is no answer. You cannot explain the disappearance of an entire empire without admitting there was a catastrophe. Was it natural? A solar storm causing an energy grid overload? Was it artificial? Sabotage causing a global failure? Or was it a war? A war in which the winners rewrote history? We don't know.
But we know the result. A world where energy is controlled, where history is written by the victors, where technologies of the past are forgotten or classified. I have spent months studying archives, comparing photos, and talking to engineers, and the more I dig, the more questions I have. But here is a fact you can't deny. The 1888 photograph, a 2,000-ton building, 30 horses. Physics says impossible. History says possible. Who is right? Or maybe that's not the question. Maybe the question is, what else aren't they telling us? About the pyramids? About megaliths? About the age of civilization? About who we are and where we came from? One impossible photo and the entire world picture collapses. So what really happened in the 19th century? Was there a Tartaria? Did technologies exist that we have lost? Or is all of this just a misunderstanding, a distortion, an inaccuracy? I don't know, and that is an honest answer. But I know one thing. Until we ask the right questions, we will never get the right answers. So here is a question to leave you with. Think about it. If buildings could be moved by impossible methods, what else is considered impossible only because we have forgotten how it's done?